If you've just joined, if you could please mute, that would be great to cut out any background noise. And a bit more, more people joining, more people joining. Morning, Michael. Thanks for joining. Callum as well. Morning, Callum. Thanks for joining.
Morning.
Great to see you. If you could just mute Callum, that would be great. Thank you very much. And yeah, that's good. Cut out some background noise. Hope we all had some good bank holiday weekends. Maybe there was some good weather. I wasn't in the UK at the weekend, so I'm assuming it was quite nice. So, yeah, I hope you all had good times. Let's just give it another minute, and then we'll pass you on to the wonderful William. Here we go. Morning, Peter. Thanks for joining.
I understand that William's got a fairy tale for us to follow.
Has he? Oh.
In the usual C-suite style, I should imagine will be very professional, but also quite fun.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. That's good. Okay. So, well, let's just start. That'd be fine. There'll be a few more joiners, no doubt. But good morning, everybody. Welcome to this week's coffee morning with Pension Playpen. Delighted to have William McGrath, who some of you may know, some of you may not know, to talk about the wonderful world of run-on and the services that maybe he can offer for his C-suite. I don't want to steal any thunder from you, William, but well, we'll pass over to you very shortly. Just some housekeeping. Number one, we are recording, so can we have thumbs up, Callum, Chris, Derek, John? Thumbs up, we're recording. So we'll get the video up later on today. And in usual Playpen style, we like Q&A all the way through, or we can do it at the end. But if you have any questions for William, or indeed Henry, then please raise a hand at any time. And we'll also open up the chat room if you want to make any comments or put any links in there. As some of you may have seen, we've got a donations page now just to see if anybody would like to make a donation for today's event or any event that you've attended in the last couple of years. So I'll put that donations page in there as well. So we are recording, and without any further ado, I will pass over to William, and Henry will monitor the hand raising, I think. So welcome, William. Thank you for your time in advance. So over to you.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I'm sure Henry will keep us on the straight and narrow. But what we really wanted to do today was really to point out there are a few policy adjustments which could be made, which will make a big impact on outcomes for members and really for the industry generally. And it's not that difficult to produce a much more balanced approach to pensions. And so we produced these 10 little summaries of what could be done. So if I share the screen, which I hope it will do okay. There we are. So we think there's some regulations and there's some maths that make DB run-on a winner. Why is that? Well, I think here's the first half of our 10 things, and I'm sure Henry will point out any points or flaws in some of this. But the first thing I come back to is scrutiny of actuarial work. Now, that sounds really, really dull, but I think is a massive, massive point, really, because when you go back through time, you realize that actually there isn't any scrutiny of actuarial work, and that's actually quite a problem. And when we go through the other 9, in many ways, if you could get that one right, the knock-on effect would be tremendous. And this isn't just me thinking, oh gosh, actuaries are given too easy a ride. No, there's been 3 big reports: the Penrose report, the Marsh report, the Kingman report. Now, John Kingman is about as brainy as you can get, and they all concluded that there wasn't any scrutiny of actuarial work. So here's a few of their conclusions. And we wrote a piece recently that Penrose, Morris, Kingman, we hear you, partly because there is going to change in the offing. The AGA bill, when it comes out this year, hopefully will actually give a bit of a thump to this area and actually may produce a statutory framework, which is exactly what Kingman suggested back in 2018. You know, look at that. Real risk for shareholders may be assuming the FRC's current oversight of actuarial profession is a great deal more thorough and effective than the absence of credible powers it can actually be. Well, that was
If I can just
2018.
jump in here.
What?
Just jump in. When you say ARGA here, you mean the actuarial regulatory group, not your previous employer.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. I'm a big fan of ARGA because obviously having run ARGA for many years, but no, this is a good thing that ARGA needs to heat up. This is the Audit and Regulation Governance Authority, which is replacing the FRC, or should be. That's what was is long promised. But I think the impact, going back to my initial point, which is that it's been a big effect. If Kingman's recommendations of giving the control of actuarial work to the PRA had happened, I wonder if LDI would have happened, because the PRA would have been much more on top of it. And if you then look at the rise of the 50 billion a year risk transfer industry, I wonder if the PRA was behind it, or looking at the sums, I wonder if they wouldn't have been much, should we say, closer to it. And so, without boring on too much on this particular one, although it does run through all the others, I would say, is there a problem today? Yes. If you look what the FRC says it's doing now, all these years after Kingman, it's running a pilot on reviewing what's going on in the actuarial profession. So when you think there's that much latitude, it's not really surprising that we've seen some of the consequences that we have. So that was my first point, I think, to pick up on. But perhaps go to a couple of other points which I've like to dig in on a bit. The other thing is back at the Morris Committee, they gave a lot of authority to the FRC, so that's the Financial Reporting Council, to look at actuarial stuff, and the other stuff was left with the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries. Lovely folk they are too. Right, they produced lots of really very good, very well written studies and an actuarial code, but when you look to conflicts, which is one of their key prints, I find it difficult to see how the CMI, which is the continuous mortality investigation, which produces the tables, which everybody uses in the world of valuing pensions. Key thing, who is on those committees? Oh me down, the projections committee has 8 people on it, of which 3 are three are insurance, 2 are reinsurers, and 3 are from the major consultants. Does that strike you as a conflict of interest? Well, it does strike me as certainly an apparent conflict of interest, which the IFOA is apparently keen to avoid. So does that matter? Yes, it does, because when you look at how much money is being made by reinsurers through longevity swaps, I wonder why they're making so much money. Well, impossible to tell, because most of the information is kept behind a paywall. But if it wasn't, I wonder what you'd find. So I think, is that one of the factors which is making the funded re so popular, for example? It's jolly well worth a bit of an investigation, I think, looking at that. So that's my second theme. A couple of little tweaks. You haven't really got to do a lot other than suggest you're going to do something. And I think the industry's, my theme here, starts self-correcting. My third theme here is on compliance priorities. Now, I'm a big fan, as some of the people on this call know, of TAS 300 V2.1, which is known to very, very few people. Indeed, if you would read a lot of stuff from the TPI, you wouldn't have thought that it existed at all. But it is what the FRC, the Financial Reporting Council, uses to control actuarial standards. And actually, TAS 300 V2 is jolly good. It was really reflects some of the work that was suggested by the last Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, who really started to get, I think, pretty well stuck into this space. And it says that before you can go and do a buyout, which may be a good idea or not, before you do a buyout, you actually have to compare it to other options like running on. So why don't you do the work? And that's really my theme for this one, is just tell everybody to do the work. Do a proper risk benefit analysis, not a legally of nice legal sentences. No, do some work. Actually do the liability calculations, the downside risk, and look at the upside. And I think, again, once you've done it, a lot of really clever people in this space look at the numbers and you'll start to reach different conclusions. So that's my third theme. And then you go, so what else should you be doing? Well, I think the thing that is really staggering, I think, in this space, as a former finance director and chief exec and an accountant, I cannot believe how bad some of the reporting in this space actually is. And I pick up on one, I think, good example here, which is the NatWest Trophy, which was won by Rothsey, who are now sponsor cricket, as you probably have noticed. Well, I think there's a definite case for taking this one to the third umpire. The lack of disclosure on the deal, which was one of the very, very largest deals ever, if not the largest, of risk transfer, a £10 billion buy-in. Right. When you would have thought, if that had been a corporate transaction, it would have had lots and lots of FCA required disclosures. Well, a buy-in, 8 billion quid, okay, of liabilities being transferred to Rothsey. Well, it doesn't even get a name check, until a month after the deal's been done. It sort of sneaks in on page 30 of the group's interim management report. Right. That sort of then gets picked up by a wider media audience, just about. And then when you come to the accounts, and again, I find it remarkable that only if you look on page 365 do you find out it was an 8 billion deal. And if you can be bothered and not, I suppose we're a particular enthusiast, you actually look on page 318, you can work out that that was a 2.4 billion pound hit. Or was it? Was it a 2.4 billion pound hit? Not really, because NatWest already had a 7 billion surplus, which it wasn't booking. Right. Okay. So whether that's right or wrong, for all jolly good explanations for a lot of that stuff, but what it highlights is, come on, FRC, this is your patch. Surely this is time for a thematic, and they do excellent thematic reviews of pensions. Pensions disclosures all over the place. So I think that's worth doing. And why do we think it's worth also looking then at what I would call folklore and the law? Well, this is where I think where it's all sort of can come back together again. What you need to do, in my opinion, is really just look harder at the numbers. Because what is the downside risk? What is the upside opportunity for a member? And where things are slightly odd, I think it's safe to say, is that the downside risk involving the PPF is really not looked at very, very hard. Why? Because, the folklore is that you can't take the PPF into account. Really? Okay. If you did take it into account, what would the numbers? What is the numbers telling you? Now, this slide isn't really meant to be gone through or whatever. It's just I thought if we were doing a thing about majoring on numbers, and the numbers matter, or I'm trying to show with this slide, and indeed with the next slide, is that you can do the numbers. And all this slide is trying to demonstrate is when you start looking at the downside risk for a real life member of a pension scheme, you conclude that actually the downside risk, which is really of what makes it worth giving it to a life insurer, is the gap between the PPF, the marvelous, successful, and I think important safety net, and the FSCS, which is the one that is offered to you by the bulk transfer market. Well, what's the gap? Surely that has to be your first question. If you're spending a lot of money on getting rid of this risk, well, what is it? And so what this is demonstrates that we've done some modeling here, and what that demonstrates is that you go through it by area, age by age, and you can work out exactly what is the risk. And when you put it on a probabilistic basis, the probability of this poor old sponsor falling into the PPF, the answer is not very big at all. You then put the extra overlay, which is the last thing of these complicated slides, but just to show some degree, just to show they can be done and exist. Well, what's the chance of, even if your sponsor keeled over, that at that point the scheme hasn't got enough money to do a buyout or pay all the pensions anyway? And given the funding position of a lot of these schemes now, well, they're actually pretty well funded. And if you run a pretty sensible investment strategy, still like one that a life insurer might run, let's say Gilts 150, Gilts 170, the chances of you not having enough of the money, not very high. And that's why we've been saying for a long time that when you look at the downside risk, and then you look at the upside, as soon as there is an upside, then everything starts to change. So that's really what I think is there is good work to be done around the PPF. Perhaps may come back to that in some questions on why I think the PPF is being misrepresented in what role it can play. What's the consequence of all that? Well, it seems to me that we've ended up with a straightforward regulatory arbitrage here, which is between what the life insurers can produce, or by way of returns, and what everyday companies can produce, or schemes can produce. And there is a gap. You've got the TPR, although it's maybe modifying its position. Let's say your low dependency number is gilts plus a half. That's on your liability side, but also if you invest towards that number or you reduce your investment risk over time, you are now investing at a level which is lower than the life insurers would invest in if they had all that money. That's something I think I think is well understood within the TPR, and obviously it's been very interesting to hear sort of David Fairs in particular, who's obviously was heavily involved in that, agree there is a 1% gap at least between the two investment returns. So why not say, and this is I think really pretty central thing, if a well-funded scheme, this is where I think you could have a good proposal. If the TPR came out tomorrow and said, well-funded schemes that we can decide exactly what sets of circumstances, but fundamentally well-funded schemes should be investing or can invest at something over gilts 150, gilts 2, those sorts of numbers. Blow me down. What does that start doing? It means that schemes are investing for the longer term at a higher return rate. And if you do that, then a lot of the other things the government's so enthusiastic for, rightly, more investment in the UK, longer term investment, they all come back on the agenda. Why not say invest for the long term? And here is exactly the sort of point where government can make a difference. Why not say, yes, we'll incentivize you to do exactly that, invest in that kind of way, invest more in the UK, you can at that point start impacting those risk benefit analyses that we were talking about. It's open for you. It is not hard. You could just make a couple of statements now and things look better. And that feeds through to my enthusiasm for credible alternatives. Now, credible alternatives is, if anybody gets enthusiastic and reads TAS 300 V2, credible alternatives is a government expression. They suggested before you do a buyout, you need to look at credible alternatives. Now, there's been a credible alternative around for a while, but they're all normally on a life support machine and haven't gone mainstream. But if they were given a level playing field, like they could invest at similar levels to the life insurers, and you actually had a mindset which was run on with added security was possible. Suddenly, the idea that you could do that, particularly if government started to come with helping or enthusiastic for an allocation of surpluses between different groups. This is a great opportunity, and I think credible alternatives are sort of spluttering, I would say, into life. We've worked with I think really very impressive approaches that could be done that provide security on the downside and basically invest slightly more money for the longer term, still potentially even with insurance wrappers to cover some of that downside risk. All good stuff, but it needs going mainstream. It needs that area being covered in the TAS 300 exercises, not with a few lines, but with a proper effort. That's what TAS 300 asks for. The government, the regulators should just say, we expect to see that work done. The TPR should say, yes, if you've done that work, include it in your DWP required work. And I think you're starting to see some very different outcomes. So I think there is a great opportunity to see the economy galvanized, helped by more money being put into long-term UK-based investments. The government can help with that, but a mindset within the pensions industry that they can help make that happen. Now, why doesn't it happen? Well, there is, and we love them as almost like have to. The life insurers dominate this space. You've gone from a market in which the life insurers had a good little business to something now where you've got £50 billion a year being transferred to life insurers. That's a lot of dosh. And they are making, and I think this is where, again, a bit more investigation by everybody would help. How much money are they making? Obviously, the accounting is a jolly good area, which the FRC should be looking at, but they appear to be making a lot of dosh. Why is that? So I think that is an area that should be looked at. And when you start looking at the power of the life insurers, I get reminded of one of my favourite lines from parliamentary history, which actually goes back to 1780. There's a chap called John Dunning, who became First Lord Ashburton. He was complaining about the Crown's power to give its household pensions. So it was a pensions question back in 1780. And he had passed in the Commons a resolution which said that the power of the Crown has increased, is increasing, and ought to be diminished. And I think we're back in that same state. I think the power of the life insurers, great folk, they're just too powerful for everybody else in this space. They're doing too well, and it needs a bit of thinking about. Because not only I went to the cricket the other way, went to the Oval, and you see around the edge, it says Rothsey protecting pensions all around the boundary, all the adverts. And you think, great, protecting pensions from what? Well, I wonder if those FSCS against PPF calculations have been done. But what we do know There's, they've got a lot of money coming to and one of the things that they say, oh, UK's largest pension insurer. Doesn't mention owned in Singapore and Massachusetts. Oh, really? So I think there's, again, right, okay, that's a lot of money being given to life insurers, maybe for good reasons, but I just don't think the case is being proved. And I think, again, this is one maybe for the IFOA, you know, to think about what, you know, if this was the British Medical Association or whatever, or something, okay, there's a lot of ethics about who can go to what, who gets tickets for what, all those sorts of things. Who sponsors the independent trustees' annual shindigs? I think it's sort of area where from the outside you can't tell, but it looks a little odd. Looks a little odd. Anyway, so those are all good things that regulators could choose to look at. But what should they overall do themselves? And I find this fascinating, really. Why does the regulatory framework look a little fractured or a little bit all over the place? There's an awful lot of people involved here, all with their own little remits. So we've got the FRC, as we discussed, maybe not given quite the powers it needs. Perhaps that's why we're so enthusiastic for ARGA. The pensions regulator, obviously, well, so a long established position. What happens next? Obviously, changing some of their thinking under some pressure. But there's them. Then the IFOA. Yeah, you feel they should do more. You know, I know they had a lot of powers taken away from them, but surely you could get a bit more stuck in. The FCA is again a fascinating topic because it's certain areas on the sort of looking after members of or looking after the retail market, lots and lots of rules. If you're looking after corporates, lots and lots of rules on disclosure. Do you actually look at some of these documents produced by the lovely folk from the pension consultants? Who looks at those documents when they say this is a great deal or a really attractive pricing? Who's got the verification file? Who asks questions about how did you conclude that? When you say it's a competitive market, what do you mean by competitive? Or do you just mean it's so lucrative, everybody wants to join? So I think that's another area where just a bit of definition. Obviously, got the Pension Protection Fund, lots and lots to talk about giving it a bigger remit. That would be fantastic. I think they've done a great job. You've got to say somebody they've got a surplus of 10 billion. You know, it is a kisses to the crowd, round of applause. What the job that they've done. How do you use it in the future? Well, I think that's good work for government to think about. And then you've got a couple of others, the Bank of England, the PRA. A couple of questions. They got obviously about funded re is one of their favourite subjects. Also, going back to the thing about overeating, overindulgence in the life insurance market. On to a couple of good cases. They've got a lot of actuaries, as Kingman pointed out. They could do a lot of stuff here. That's another one for them. And obviously the CMA, well, they were, I think, safe to say, and a brilliant piece by you, Henry, a few years ago, after the CMA was, I think, comprehensively seen off by the life insurers, got them all answering good questions, just the wrong questions. But I think, okay, maybe they should be on standby for a few of these issues. So what have you got here? You've got 7 different people sort of involved, reporting to 3 different government departments before you get to the Cabinet Office. I was looking through some of this stuff, and what did we find? We found that actually a bit of coordination would be good. And there used to be coordination between 2013 and 2022. There was an excellent idea, the Joint Forum for Actuarial Regulation. suggests, oh, perhaps we're right. A bit of coordination is needed. Anyway, it disappeared. What a great idea to bring it back, because you could bring it back and get a bit of coordination between all these different teams. Would be a jolly good idea. So there you go. There's very keen to hear what people have to think on some of those things. But you've got 10 little things, tweaks, I would say, tweaks, but very consequential tweaks that you could make. So this doesn't, even the threat that legislation or statutory thing is coming along would just get everybody to straighten their tie, pull up the socks. And I think the impact on practice in this space would be fantastic. So we love the idea really that change has come, and then obviously that when the bell sounds, this Torsten Bell, top, as far as I see, top bloke. I've got his book here. I think it's outstanding. I love the line he says that which summarizes his approach, which is, when the graphs are this bad, it's time to stop drawing them and do something about it. Well, I would like to submit to Torsten, here are 10 straightforward things you could do tomorrow, which would make a big difference and really start some of those graphs going in the right direction. So what does that mean? You have to summarize it all around here again. Pensions can be protected and they can contribute to the UK economy. It's daft to have this amount of money, 1.2 trillion, not doing enough to help the UK economy. And I think a lot of it's about attitude, and rather than suddenly worrying about the normal thing, which I haven't really covered as much as I might have done, which was on fiduciary duty being used as a sort of, oh, woe is me. You're getting your fiduciary duty questions wrong, most people, because you haven't done the sums. When you've done the sums properly, you will be reaching different conclusions. You don't need to look at the general issues around the health of the global economy, or no, look at your sums. And I think that's when you start reaching different conclusions. So that's why we say numbers do count. And if you've done a good calculation of risk benefit for TAS 300 V2, 2.1 when it comes out shortly, I think you just start thinking differently. And I think members and sponsors then re-engage because they can see an upside. Members and sponsors haven't really been too involved because what's the upside? Well, as soon as the government you start to talk about surpluses, discretion, then the use of discretion, which is something again we could talk more about. It's available. It is not that difficult to use discretion, and as members get more enthusiastic and involved, I think they will expect more of their trustees, which I think is great news, because there is a simple question. What have you protected me from on the downside? What is the upside available to me? And have you tried to go and get it? So, or have you concluded that it's not your concern because you had legal advice or supposedly legal advice on that? Well, question that legal advice, because I can't see how when there's upside available to you, you should ensure that the trustees and their advisors ask relevant questions, which brings you back to TAS 300. And when you've done all that, I think you find that actuaries with a threat of scrutiny, after all these 250 years of nobody looking at what they actually produce, a little bit of scrutiny will bring a lot of self-correction. And once you've done that, I think the credible alternatives will thrive. They won't be allowed to sort of be kept below salt and kept alive, but not getting in the way of that 50 billion a year risk transfer industry. I think it'd be great, healthy for the risk transfer industry if it was being put on a little bit more scrutiny. So we think investment strategies when people look at this again, go long term. When they go long term, that means rising productive asset allocations. That is fantastic news for the UK economy. So that's I think obviously we're all in favour of Run On for Good, and we think all stakeholders benefit from it. So that's our message, and hopefully people enjoyed that, and we can stop sharing and hopefully take a few questions.
Yeah, that's marvellous. I haven't enjoyed a session in that way since the very early days of the Transparency Task Force, which was set up by Elspeth Con Keating and Chris Sear many moons ago. And still doing a good job, but in a different space. My first comments would be that you are actually shining a torch and giving light in an area which is extremely dark to people like me who are outside of the IFOA or the ICAEW or those other organizations which do a good job but don't necessarily share all the information in as wide a way as possible. So thank you very much for doing that. And thank you for the people who've been contributing to the chat. John Spade, Peter Cameron Brown. Thank you very much, Mr. Cooper, Callum. It's really important that we keep this going. So thank you very much. I am not an actuary, I'm not an accountant, I'm not well placed to comment on the technicalities. But my question is, are we doing what we can to protect members whose money is in these surpluses and who seem to have very little responsibility, or sorry, very little right to any of it, or indeed an explanation about why the money has not come their way? And I guess that's my question to you, William. When you were looking at that work being done on RBS/NatWest, did you see anything which NatWest and RBS members actually got out of that buyout with Rothsay?
I think obviously that's obviously isn't the whole process of the buy-in. I think the lack of almost a belief, and I haven't touched on it even with one or two of the people who were more directly involved subsequently, the belief that they don't need to disclose stuff and they don't need to have it discussed. I think it's ridiculous. They may be doing brilliant things. They may, but where is from a corporate point of view, your accounts, why is it an exercise to find the information? It shouldn't be. It should be. That's what the FRC or this is. You don't. All the great work was done on the Transparency Task Force. This is par excellence. You cannot be saying it's okay to have deals. I'm not picking on that necessarily. Other than we've looked at several companies doing this sort of stuff. But hang on, you bury the losses below the line. This is where the OCI, which I know is technical stuff, you bury a lot of those losses. And you never explain it. The idea that NatWest has a whopping great surplus in its pension scheme on an accounts basis. I know we know there's lots of different bases, but 7 billion quid, right? What's the plan? Or is it going to go through a series of these buy-ins until it becomes a buyout? And you've used that surplus to hide the fact you're taking hits all the time. Or hide, maybe a bit harsh. I'm sure there's good explanations, but it should be out there. There should be a section in the accounts. There should be something that the shareholders are looking at. Obviously, the government was a shareholder very recently. Hang on, what's going on? Why is there a plan? Was there a consideration of a plan which would result in time in members getting better pensions on a discretionary basis? Why not? If you just carry on the iron laws of arithmetic, will give you're going to have a surplus. Okay, okay, you've got to cover the downside risk, one form or another. There's lots of insurance folk who would help with that. But where's the ambition? Where's the hope that you're going to give better pensions to people? You know, a few things have come up, and I know you've done some great work on this, Henry, about the pre-97s. You know, people don't get any increase in the PPF and all this sort of stuff. And lots of companies, yeah, let's have the ambition to do something about it. Let's have the ambition to say, if we run on the scheme like this, we can give some better pensions to people, and you can do it. It can be done. The government can make it easier, but it needs members of pension schemes to see an upside. And as soon as they do, they should be on to the trustees. It's not about you, the trustees, it's about the members. The trustees aren't an end in themselves. You're helping members. You're not the purpose. You know, this is where even the sort of good private equity folk coming in, hang on, are you doing enough? Are you setting the bar high enough for yourselves in getting better pensions to members? So that's I feel, you know, I feel it's ridiculous that when some of these schemes have big surpluses, particularly some of these, that there is not a framework and an ambition to get it. And you end up with another one. I know a number of people even on the call have looked at, like WH Smith's. You know, hang on, WH took a nice return of, where did that come from? What was given to the members? Perhaps if you're on the inside again, you know, but where's the discussion? Where's the level of disclosure, which means that people actually have to discuss this openly?
Thank you. Look, I don't want to stand in the way of anyone asking questions, but unless there are any questions, I will continue asking them.
Okay. A couple of hands raised, Henry. We got Peter Cameron. Peter, you go first, and then I think Callum's got his hand raised. So,
right. Thank you very much. I missed them.
Thank you, Henry. Yes, I was just going to pick up on this Rossi NatWest thing. I have a family member who's a pensioner in the scheme and received a notification that the buy-in had happened, but they had no change and said there will be no change to your pensions. They'll continue to pay by the scheme, so it's everything as before. So there was no suggestion of any distribution to the members. Secondly, I wholeheartedly agree with your comment about the reporting of it being the predominant thing. And the major thing, I think, is the fact that pension scheme surpluses tend not to be reported as a surplus in the companies that are thinking about potentially buying out, which means, as in WH Smith, that when they want to do a corporate deal, and say the NatWest probably is a corporate deal situation and the transfer of ownership from the public sector to the private sector, they see it as merit of having no asset for a pension scheme, and therefore the whole thing is totally distorted. And the shareholders in WH Smith appear to have lost about £500 million of surplus in the pension scheme by the deal, because if you trace it back to 2021 or 22, I can't remember now, but certainly it was in the crisis, the LDI crisis, when the gilt yields were very heavily negative, and the liability measures were based on that, and that was when they entered into the LDI stroke precursor to with the buyout and buy out in mind. And yes, the company received, I think it was £87 million after tax out of the pension scheme, or will do. But previously they had £1.4 billion of assets in the pension scheme, and paying pensions at the rate of 42 million a year.
I think these are good examples of, I'm sure if you know or an insider, you're looking at it, there's all good explanations, I'm sure. But reality is you shouldn't be able to do that behind closed doors. You really should have to explain what you're doing. And from a member of the scheme, you should know whether your trustees, member elected or company, are on the case. And I think, you get all these nice, as I do for pension, they send these nice little booklets around telling me everything's hunky-dory and they have annual events to get together. Hang on. What I want to know is, where is the scheme? What are you doing? You're obviously protecting me on the downside. I jolly well hope so, particularly if you've got big parents and all this sort of stuff. But what is your plan for the future? Will there be upside? You look at all these people around the place the last few years, with inflation being where it is, the fundamental value of some of these pensions has fallen substantially. Okay, but now one of the knock-on effects was these better returns that people are getting. Well, why? What's the plan to see whether you could claw back some of the things that people lost? The caps on inflation, they're in there, were introduced not when people, in a lot of cases, signed up. They were introduced with the good report, and all this came in much later. I was chief executive of a company where we did start hunkering down on inflation increases and all this kind of stuff. That's fine and dandy, maybe, but why isn't there a bounce back when the funds are there to do something about it? Why aren't we thinking ahead?
If I could just add one further comment. Why are companies not considering reopening DB schemes for DB benefits to get all the same benefits and the members?
I agree entirely. I think, but fundamentally, the clever thing to do with the surplus and the pension scheme a generation ago, and it remains the case, don't take money out, put people in. It's obvious that it's the sensible thing to do. That's why recycling funds into CDC is so obviously the right answer.
We would also argue that you should be taking your DC money back into your DB scheme in return for extra DB benefits, and I know that that's on your.
Absolutely. There's so many. As soon as you stop almost having the industry dominated by sort of legal and governance, and actually, a breath of fresh air is needed from the numbers. Look at the numbers. Get the numbers people to play more central role, and you reach different conclusions. Stop scaring yourself with second tier issues.
Thank you. I'm going to come on, if I may, Peter, to Callum. You've been very patient, Callum. Do you want to speak?
Yeah. Thanks, Henry. So I'm really supportive of the general thrust of all this, William. Even as an actuary, I definitely think we should be looking at the alternatives and the outcomes. So I was thinking about, imagining being supportive of the thrust of it, imagining what are the barriers to all of this happening. And I was just thinking through stakeholders. So maybe an observation and a couple of questions. On actuaries, I think one of the barriers might be their ability to persuade their trustees or their company to undertake some analysis which is unfamiliar on modelling that they may not have built yet. Well, we have, but not everybody has. And some actuaries are quite good at being persuasive, but it's not a core skill. So I wonder if in the regulations there was this requirement, I think it's John Hamilton and others have said in the comments, to require in TAS 300 to look at what would be the impact on member outcomes of running on and, for example, sharing benefits 2080 or something like this. Just if the regulations required something of measurement, actuaries would do it for all their clients, and it would, and I think they'd probably welcome it, because the challenge just now is all the stuff I talked about, but also just the commercial reality of, if you're doing this additional work, how do you pitch for it and get. So that's one actuarial bit. I think the regs would help. I was curious, maybe you or others, what you think the role of professional independent trustees are in facilitating or not credible alternatives, and similarly investors and companies, and whether they still need to go on a journey from liabilities. DB is only downside to actually it's a potential upside opportunity. Questions.
No, I think absolutely the right questions. Absolutely. Really, it is quite funny that it's what I sometimes for years now referred to as the tyranny of chargeable hours. You know, basically people, if I haven't got somebody to pay for it, I can't do it. I was actually somebody who is a great guy, who's the boss of one of the very large, he actually said, yeah, we know we should do it, but we don't, because who's paying? That is really close to pathetic, isn't it, really? Because are you, surely at some point you've got to have a responsibility beyond your budget.
Oh, William, I totally agree. And to be clear, we've got member outcomes modelling and all that kind of stuff, and we do invest to a degree. But I think what we're seeing is a weight of money thing here. So where is all the money? And it's the insurance companies and so on, and the consultants are capital light, relatively speaking. So, yeah.
No, I agree. So, and that's why the whole trickle down of the capital coming from the life insurers, they're the people, as I'm joking and laughing about, their patronage is just too powerful compared with everybody else. If you're not on the buy list, you're out of the game. That's not picking on immediate. That's always been the way of the world. You could say in this space, it's not healthy. It really isn't. It really isn't healthy. You would have thought that the independent trustees coming in really should be replacing that good counterpoints you used to get from the finance directors. Yeah. Who didn't take any nonsense. I don't myself. In terms of spending money, but you did have a real focus on outcomes. And if there was an outcome which was good for you in accounting terms, cash terms, you weren't scared to actually put the money in because you knew there was an upside and you wanted your team to go and get it. So I think the independent trustees, that's what makes me shake my head. The idea, I was looking at a conference run by one of the big independence firms last year, and they're advertising above their heads of the people doing a thing discussing run on against buyout was Justin Rothsey. What? I don't think there's any sector where you could get away with that. Any other sector, I've worked in lots of sectors, I know you can get away with that. Anyway, but I think that the people who are missing with the other people that you've referred to are the shareholders and the investors. You need to do more. You need to do more. And again, it's almost lazy historical thinking. Oh, pensions, this is a disaster. It's a damage limitation exercise. Get rid of the effing thing as soon as possible. And that is absolutely all pervasive. But again, show them the numbers. And as soon as the shareholder thinks that actually, if we could get our DB surplus to fund our DC contributions or improve pensions generally, and you could get that to help in accounting terms, it's more tricky, but still possible. I think I've remembered I'm really interested in this subject. I think there's another, go back to Dear or Torsten Bell's, I think, brilliant, as I say, excellent book. But one of the really good lines on pensions in there about the DB to DC stuff is just because the subject is boring doesn't mean it's unimportant, which I thought was very good. Yeah, Torsten, can make this important tomorrow. Just tell people exactly as you said, do the sums. Do the sums. We can't say exactly what all the different companies, everybody's got their own circumstances, but come on, do the sums. And if investors thought there was value in it, or even let's take all the investors, green investors, or the people who are more keen on running on, get on the case with the companies and say, have you looked at this? If you run on, you're going to have more money at a more active way, and you can have higher asset allocations to the kind of funds that you want to run. Don't just take it, oh, it was all too difficult. Come on. So I think it's back to where I started, really. There's a lot of good stuff can happen just by people being more enthusiastic, wanting to get it stuck in because they can see the upside for members, and there's ultimately the other people who don't just get taken for granted. Number of times it's almost the lucky bastard generation. I'm not so sure. You trustees, you are supposed to be looking after the interests of these people. You're not meant to be judgmental. You're meant to be looking after their interests. So come on. And I think that's there's a lot of it. I think good things to be done. I think a little bit of government trigger, and I think there's a lot of good progress to be made.
There's some very good stuff in the chat line. I love the comments made by Anthony Barker, but I don't understand the last bit. Thanks very much, John and others. But now I'm going to hand over to our old friend, John Quinlivan, who I think may have a slightly different perspective, but I may be wrong on that. So off you go, John.
Not particularly different. I think that has to be under comparison is ultimately comparing pensions with insurance and the various stakeholders. And to do that, you need pensions knowledge, insurance knowledge, and asset knowledge. And that generally doesn't exist as widely as in one space as we might hope. And therefore, it's not a great surprise when a CFO is looking for advice in this space and they look to the two parties that they might think of, the EBCs and the independent trustees. And if the skill sets don't particularly exist too deeply in those organisations, is it any surprise they're struggling to get their arms around it? I don't think so. I mean, I don't think it's a chicken and egg situation where Callum's point is very well made. Clients are going to need to see the expertise to instruct, or else be directed, one or the other.
And I think one of the things that come out of a lot of it is it would help if it was easier for people to see how they can get access to all the different components. In many ways, if you go back to the olden days, before 97, all this sort of stuff, the actuary was brilliant. A lot of the actuaries were brilliant because they actually played all the parts in the play, and they actually pull all these threads together. And that's what's happened. Everything's got so siloed that people don't really know what happened. And that's why, one of my good lines jokes about sort of what you need is a czar for this space is, it applies both overall. You need a sort of, somebody that can understand all the different bits, help all the different regulators. But in many ways, I think the point that you're making comes back to almost like the independent trustees. You're not here just to shepherd people into the arms of the life insurers. You're meant to think it all through. If you're not commissioning a proper TAS 300 study, you jolly well should be. You're just not doing your job at that point. So that's why I think it's, who produces the best strategies then? At least it's on a level playing field. And I think, the fact that people don't have all the complete school kits to go through, I think, there's a bit of work to be done by the trustees. Some of the consultants clearly can do it, but they need to feel that there's the economics work for them. That's back to they should think that if they haven't got to the bottom of it and put good stuff into a report done for the TPR, the DWP regs, somebody's going to come along and say, well, why haven't you done your job? And that's where back to a bit more scrutiny is a good, it helps in many ways the consultants if they say, well, we have to do this. We have to, it's like lawyers now can say, well, actually, just shepherding it to the life insurers, actually, that may cause you more trouble than unless you've got a jolly good file to justify it. That could be, somebody's going to pick up that file 5 years down the track. As we're making the jokes about about class actions. It can happen.
Thanks.
Okay. We're at that point where we're coming to the end, and there's some really interesting stuff which verges on an area which I know is of interest to a number of you, which is the capital backing of pension schemes to allow them to do things which they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And nice to see Anthony there. I'm sorry we haven't heard from you, Anthony, but it may be that you want to come on and talk to us at a later stage on some interesting views. I think capital backing is an important area.
I think sector encouraging that kind of thing is so obviously a good idea. It really is. You know, why wouldn't you want people who may have the relevant, as John's been saying, the relevant bit of expertise, put it in together as a package, cover the downside risk, share the upside. It just, in one form or another, different ways of doing it, that should go mainstream. Why isn't that mainstream?
Well, listening to a certain gentleman from Punter Southall on Wednesday at Pension Live, he said it just takes one and the gates will open. I think we have a real difficulty at the moment getting the first one over the line. And I do hope the consultants will play their part in encouraging people to have the courage of their conviction. But I don't want to push too hard at this because it's an area which I'm not particularly expertise in. But I'm very hopeful that we will see both capital backing and CDC playing an important role in what can be done with these surpluses to ensure that we get to a situation where we have more schemes, DB schemes, both staying open, but also distributing money in a wider area. And it's quite nice to Michael Jones on the VFM podcast over the weekend talking about this, one which I would strongly recommend. I'd like to say to William what I think everyone else wants to say, and I saw John said it on the card. That really was excellent. Thank you very much indeed.
Can I just as there's a major new book coming out in this space. I just want to give it a quick plug. I want to talk to you a bit just in wrapping up. There's I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Gruffalo. Well, Julia Donaldson's producing a new book, and I've come up with a plot line for her. I'm sure she might not use it, but it's how the Gruffalo and the Gruffalo's child. Well, we've now got the Gruffalo's grandparents. Now, so the Gruffalo's grandparents, the story is how they reheated DB pensions. So the story is really about, the plot is a little mouse has a DB pension and is on a journey to an inflation protected retirement income. Well, little mouse meets on the way, as you'll remember, a snake, an owl, and a fox, and they're proposing buyout if little mouse gives them all the money and doesn't ask for any discretionary increases. Well, little mouse says thank you, but can't stop because of a meeting with the Gruffalo's grandparents. Their favourite recipe, the little mouse says, is class action against the risk transfer industry. Well, little mouse walks on, is surprised to find the Gruffalo does exist and has grandparents living in a big white hall. They tend to be more class than action, and their home was a bit of a mess, full of multiple departments. But when little mouse said, I have lots of scheme member friends who are an electorate, well, bells started ringing, and they decided to tidy up immediately, as we've been proposing today, and make use of discretion far easier. So little mouse kept the money, ran on, invested more widely in the wood, and so the mice, the snake, the owls, and the Gruffalo family lived happily ever after.
Well, that's very good.
Fantastic, William. Look forward to seeing the book. No, brilliant. Can everybody join me in thanking William for today's presentation? Fantastic virtual claps and everything else, and really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for joining this week. A great session. In the next week or two, I'm sure we'll be doing CDC one on capital backed, use of surpluses, lots and lots of things to discuss in this current sort of open season of pensions. It's going to be an amazing year, going to be an amazing couple of years. But William, that was a really, really good session, and long may it continue, and long may you influence the market in this way. And I hope everybody's enjoyed today's session. We continue to pray for peace in the East and the Middle East, and hopefully you can join us on the next session, which will be in June. Can you believe? So yeah, it'll be June the 3rd. for the next playpen session. But fantastic, William. Thank you very much. If you can make a donation to us, great. The donation's in the chat. And if you can't, then don't worry. But I hope you've enjoyed today's session. And if anybody wants the slides, please contact Henry or myself, and we will send you the slides, because there's quite a lot of data in one or two of those slides, William. So
yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant session.
Yeah, not for reading, it was for showing they exist.
Well, they exist. There we are. Yeah, and I'm sure somebody will check them. So, so there you go.
Yeah.
But
Thanks
great
very
to see
much.
everybody, and thanks everyone for your time, and long live the Gruffalo. So there you go. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Thanks very much. Take care. Bye.